Good morning, brethren. It's a joy to be with you again on the Lord's Day. And I know we're scattered and in our respective homes or offices, as in my case. And yet I want to let you know that I really love you, miss you, wish we were all together again, but I think we're doing the right thing and pray that God will bless our nation and help us to get over this very difficult time we're going through. The last time I spoke to you, I talked about 1 John chapter 4 and verse 8, which tells us that God is love. It tells us that anybody who does not love does not know God because God is love. But I think different people have different ideas about what love is all about and what it means to us and how it should affect our lives and how we ought to respond to a life determined to be a life of love and to be like God, who is love. But to understand what love is, it's really important to go to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse 4, where we read that there are lots of characteristics of love that we need to be acquainted with and need to be employing in our everyday life. And it tells us that love is patient. Well, if God is love and love is patient, then God is patient, and He is. He's been very patient with us, very forgiving, very charitable, very gracious, and for that reason we love Him because He first loved us. 1 John 4, verse 19. But I want to look at the subject of patience then because it is a characteristic of God. It is a characteristic of what any loving person should display in their everyday life. And it's important. I often lose my patience. I'm sure you do too. Anytime we get caught in the traffic, anytime somebody just is very abusive in their behavior or insults us, we can tend to lose our patience. And God is a God who is patient. And He has been very kind to forgive us and to help us to be like Him and give us opportunity after opportunity to change and modify our lives. That's what repentance is all about. That's what growth as a disciple is about. And I want to talk to you a few minutes about that today. As I think about what patience is, I remember an illustration that came to my mind once as I was sitting in a school auditorium watching kids play with their food, which happens in our public schools. And they had watermelon. And after finishing their watermelon, some of the kids decided in the juice that was still in their plates that they would put their finger on top of a watermelon seed and press down real hard. And when you do, it automatically, because of the way it's designed, flies. And you can shoot watermelon seeds all over the cafeteria of a school just by putting them in their own juice and then putting your finger on them and pressing down. And then another little task that you could try is to keep the seed under your finger. And you can for a little while if you don't put too much pressure, but the more pressure you put, the more apt it is to fly. And we used to cover the floor sometimes of the cafeteria of our elementary school when kids would start doing that. But what is that? What does that have to do with patience? Well, the word patience in the Greek language is a word that suggests that you are able to withstand pressure, that you're able to continue on being who you are and what you are and not moving out if pressure is applied to your life. You're not a quitter. That's one of the main things, that you are willing to persevere. And that is the way that same word is translated many times in the New Testament. Perseverance is a virtue, and it is the virtue that comes from being patient. And so when pressure is applied to your life, when all kinds of strain come upon you, like right now here in the United States and around the world, a lot of pressure is being applied to nations and applied to families and to individuals. And so as we come under a great deal of pressure, how do we respond? Are we able to be patient? Do we persevere and continue on? Or do we flee to be able to get away from the pressure? Well, Jesus tells us that we are to be patient, and the description that Paul gave us about what patience is suggests that we need to persevere and not be quitters. I remember in the New Testament a story that's found in Luke chapter 10 of two sisters who loved Jesus. And they had a brother that loved Jesus named Lazarus, and they were Mary and Martha. And when Jesus came to visit their home on one occasion, which I imagine he did on several occasions, Martha went out and started fixing some food for Jesus, which was a loving and kind thing to do. But Mary stayed at the feet of Jesus listening to his message. And after a while, because those kitchens in the Far East can be very hot at times, and the women can go through a lot of suffering and strain as they're trying to fix meals with the smoke and the heat. And Martha comes storming back into the house and asks Jesus, "Don't you care that my sisters left me to do all of the cooking, to prepare all the food, to get the meal ready? And she's just sitting here listening to you." And I'm sure Martha would have liked to do that too. But Jesus said, "You're too worried about too many things, Martha. You're feeling the pressure, and the pressure is changing your personality and affecting how you are responding to me right now." To think that Jesus didn't care. If it was anybody that ever cared for a human being, it was Jesus. And so what we see here is that Martha was impatient. She was not able to stay under the pressure, and she exploded. Sometimes we all have short fuses. Sometimes we fly off the handle, as I've heard some of the old people say, and my parents used to say. And because we have short fuses, we're very apt to just blow up and make a scene. But the word patience says, no, 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 that's not what you do. If you're like God, you are willing to stand under the pressure, be willing to wait, and give people a chance to make changes in their lives. But we've heard people say, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. And I guess that's what Martha did. She just decided to pull out and leave. And so she tore out of the kitchen, came storming into the house, and told Jesus that she was concerned because he was giving some favoritism to her sister and making her work and didn't care about her, and all the things we could say in times like that when we feel like we're not being treated properly. I think about in the Old Testament, Saul, who we mentioned in the last little lesson I recorded for you, who had been grateful to David for having killed Goliath the giant, for having been a leader in his army. And yet when the ladies of the city of Jerusalem began to sing, Saul's killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s, he became jealous. And because of his jealousy, he became angry, and on several occasions tried to kill David, even throwing a spear at him that got stuck into the wall. When we get angry and we lose all of our patience, sometimes we commit terrible crimes and do things that we shouldn't do. There's an illustration that Jesus used in a parable in Luke chapter 8 that talks about this very same thing too, where he tells us that a farmer went out to sow, and this is a parable, but a farmer went out to sow, and how many tens of thousands and 100,000s of farmers have done that throughout the centuries. But a farmer went out to sow seed, and he sowed some of the seed, and it fell on the pathway that had been trampled down and was hard like rock. And of course, nothing came out of that. Then he goes on to say that some of the seed fell on rocky soil, and at first the plant just sprung up and did real well, but then other seed fell on land that had weeds, thorns, and thistles, and it started out real well, but then it didn't continue. It died. It was choked to death by all of the surrounding plants. And then finally some seed fell on good soil and actually produced a crop up to 100 times its own size. A grain of corn will easily produce 100 grains of corn on just one ear, and yet you have a whole stalk full of them, and you can imagine how many times that's multiplied. But the point that he was trying to make, and he explains, is that some people, when they hear the word, they just don't receive it. They don't accept it. That's like the seed on the path. Then others hear the message, and they receive it with joy. Oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard of. I really like this. And so, as a consequence, they receive the message, become Christians, and start out great, but they never produce fruit. Why? Why are they never coming to fruition? It's because the roots go down from the plant into rocky soil, and they don't find the nourishment, they don't find the moisture they need, and the plant itself dies. And it's just talking about people that become Christians, people become believers in God, and start out real well, excited, but then they lose that joy and they lose that enthusiasm after a while and never come to fruition as disciples. And then the other seed that was mentioned, the one that falls among the weeds and the thorns and thistles and things like that, are plants that represent people who are excited about becoming a Christian, but as soon as they hit the lust and the temptations and the trials of this life, just like the ones that fell among the rocks and had no moisture and hit the hard times in life and quit, they also quit. Why? Because they are just pulled away by the lust of the world and the temptations that surround us and never become fruit bearers. Only some stay. And who are they? Well, they're the ones that persevere. What do you mean? They're the ones that under the pressure stay. It doesn't matter if their parents don't like them or their boyfriend or girlfriend says they have to quit. They continue. It doesn't matter if they're threatened, their lives are put in peril. They continue on because they have patience. And patience and perseverance are used interchangeably all throughout the New Testament. The same word is used and translated in different cases according to the circumstances of what's being taught. So we need to be patient. We need to be like the seed that fell on good soil and that put down roots and bore fruit even to 100 or more times its own size and quantity. And so as we think about what patience is, God is patient. He is willing to stay with us and labor with us and forgive us and forgive us and forgive us as long as we're willing to come to Him and confess our sins and pray. He is faithful and just to forgive us of all our transgressions, 1 John 1:9. And so these illustrations that Jesus gave also remind us of an Old Testament example, and that is of Job. He had a hard life. Not in the beginning. I mean, God blessed him. He had children. He had a family. He had a house. He had lots of animals. He was rich and couldn't complain about how he was living. But God was challenged by Satan, and Satan said, yeah, sure, Job's a nice guy and he's faithful. Why? Because you give him everything he wants and you protect him. But if he didn't have all these blessings, he probably wouldn't serve you. And so the challenge came to see if Job was going to be faithful under a lot of pressure, under temptation and strain, just like we're talking about. Would he persevere? And so what happens is God says, okay, you can do whatever you want to him, but don't kill him. And so he caused him to lose his children. His wife basically suggested that he turn against God. And he lost his wealth. He lost his health. He lost everything he had. And yet he still stayed faithful. And in Job 13:15, we're told that Job, under this stress, said, even if God kills me, I will not desert him. I will not leave him. I will not abandon him. And that's what it means to be patient, to not give up, to not throw in the towel, to not run away from the fight, but to stay and to be victorious with God's help. And as you go over to the book of James, chapter 5, verse 10 through 11, you find that it talks about the very patience of Job. And all my life I've heard people talk about the patience of Job. He has the patience of Job, or he doesn't have any patience. He's not like Job. And Job is a great illustration for us. Jesus recognized that, and James recognized that. That's why he's mentioned in the book of James. And we need to learn to have that kind of resilience. We need to have that kind of resistance to Satan when he tempts us and not give in so easily. And be willing to put our faith in God that he will be patient with us as we're patient with others. And I think that that's only fair. And Jesus and God thought that was fair because they teach us that as we treat others, that's how we're going to be treated. And consequently, we need to accept the fact that we need to be patient with other people and not give up on them just as God doesn't give up on us. And there are many cases when people disappoint us, but if God can forgive me, I can forgive them as well. And then I need to remember that if Satan attacks me like he did Jesus, that I need to stick it out. And I don't need to turn away. And Satan, I need to say, just like Job, if he kills me, I'm still going to stick with it. I'm going to be faithful to God. And in Revelation chapter 2, verse 10, we're told very clearly that we should be faithful unto death. And of course, you could look at that in two different ways. Number one, until I die. That could be old age. That could be young if you have an accident. But then another way to look at it is the way a lot of Christians did under the Roman Empire. And that is, even though the Romans kill me, if I don't deny my faith in Jesus, I'm not going to deny my faith in Jesus. I'm going to stay faithful unto the point of death. And I think that's probably the more correct interpretation. And I'm going to do like Paul told the Corinthians to do, be faithful and be strong, steadfast, unmovable, abounding in the work of the Lord, inasmuch as you know that your labor is not in vain. What do we mean by that? Well, that the reward is coming, that there will be a time when all of the effort, the sacrifice, the struggle, the fighting is worthwhile and will be recognized by God as he gives us a home with him in heaven. So as you think about patience, sometimes, we want to do like Martha and just blow up. Don't do it. It's just not worth it. I do that. And boy, it's embarrassing. It's a shameful thing to have to admit, that sometimes I'm just not as patient as I need to be. And we can be impatient with cars. We can be impatient with things that don't turn out right on the stove. We can be impatient with our wives, our children, our parents. And we shouldn't be. We ought to be willing to stay under any pressure they put on us and treat them the way a Christian ought to treat other people. And that way God will judge us as we judge others, and he will recognize that we have been patient with others, and therefore will be patient with us. I think it's almost selfish on my part sometimes when I know that I feel like I ought to get angry and upset. But I don't, because I don't want God to get angry and upset with me when he has to judge my case on the last day. And so I try to modify my behavior to show that I'm resilient, that I'm strong enough to live under the pressure and behave myself as I should. And that's how all Christians should be. One of the things that's real sad is when in the church, the whole body is affected because somebody just gets upset with somebody and they just can't tolerate them and don't do what they should do. And we need to ask God to give us the patience of Job and to extend to others the patience that he has demonstrated to us, and thereby prove that we are the children of God. We're truly disciples of Jesus Christ. Jesus rarely ever was infuriated by people. It did happen on some occasions, but he controlled himself. He didn't flee. He didn't fight. He didn't cause any kind of disturbances. He just even went to the cross submissively in order to be able to save us because of our impatience. So God is love, and love is patient, and therefore God is patient, and therefore we as his children need to be a people that demonstrate patience toward others, perseverance in the face of trials and tribulations. And right now in this country, a lot of us are really wondering what's going to happen next. We can't meet together. We can't worship in the same place. We can't congregate. People are getting sick. People are dying. And we ask ourselves, what should be my response? Faith in God, hope, and patience. Don't give up. And if you'll be patient, next week we'll be talking about this very same thing, what love is, besides just being patient. God bless you. Have a wonderful week and a wonderful day today with the brethren.